Today's Tuesday, May 15th. May the 15th be with you.
It's a terrible joke.
I've been gone so long, I've forgotten how to do this. It doesn't. And Krista's gone. She's off doing normie things, I guess.
You know, a lot of people comment and they complain. It's like, you guys don't let Krista be involved enough. Krista shows up when she wants to.
Kind of like the face recognition in the UK. It just works when it wants to. 92% facial recognition false positive rate in the UK, and the police say that's no big deal.
We talked about this last week. What's the Champions League?
No idea.
Yeah.
Football?
We didn't know either, and that made people angry. It's actually soccer.
Well, that's football in the European context.
Wrong. But yeah, we talked about this last week. Out of 2,400 instances, 2,000 were wrong. And the police are saying, you know what, that's not a big deal. That's just normal, and that's something we got to live with. AI is not perfect, but we're going to keep using it. It's
kind of like we should search everybody on the 0.0001% chance that...
Right. That's the stop and frisk, but everybody gets stopped and frisked visually.
You know, they've actually tried to say that that is non-discriminatory because it's literally everybody, which seems like an odd set of reasoning.
I guess. I mean, well, it discriminates, but I bet that there are people who get left out of it.
Oh, yeah. People that are obviously not going to be stop and frisk because they would complain and they would have the power to do something about it.
Well, you know, we talked about this recently because it's the alphabet agencies, especially the spies, are moving more and more away from agents and toward AI because the agents can't beat this kind of thing. You can't be embedded somewhere where there's going to be this kind of camera because it knows the difference between you and your fake identity. So it's going to find you.
That kind of makes sense. You watch the James Bond movies and it's like, you know, he just doesn't even bother using an alias. It's like, oh, who are you? It's like, oh, I'm James Bond. And it's like...
Well, that was the 70s. You know, I don't think modern Bond can get away with that.
He's going to have plastic surgery every other week. We got a positive news follow-up for you this week, I guess, because, you know, that's a good thing.
Well, is it positive or is it just this is how things should have been in the first place?
It's definitely this is how things should have been in the first place. But hopefully this is the last follow-up that we hear about this. Remember the 19-year-old somewhere in Canada that downloaded all the public documents from the government Freedom of Information portal? Well, the government has decided to drop the charges and that maybe he didn't actually do anything wrong.
Yeah, they charged him with some kind of crime, accessing something he wasn't supposed to. They didn't even use the hacking word. I think maybe some people did, but anybody who understood even the barest context of it didn't. And that's because all he did was went to a website and typed in different IDs. Actually, he scripted it because he's a somewhat talented young man. And they're dropping it because it's such an embarrassment, pretty much. I disagree. I think I would like to see one more headline. I'd like to see him sue the daylights out of these people because they seized all the computer equipment in the house. Now think about having all your computer equipment in your house taken for, how long ago was that? 2-3 weeks?
Oh, no, it's been much longer than that. And the guy, the dad in the family was a work-at-home dad, and they took all of his equipment that he used to work.
Right. So, modern day, taking all that stuff pretty much halts your life. And you know, people are making the argument that we need to give homeless people smartphones because that's the only way that you can do basic life activities these days. Yet the cops can come in and take everything away from you.
I wonder if in the future that we get to the point where people have, you know, cybernetic limbs and it's like, oh, the amputees and stuff. It's like, we're going to take an amputee's hands. And it's like, wow, that's
true. If it has storage in it, we have to take it.
Yeah. So that's unacceptable.
You think there's been an episode of The Black Mirror about that yet? Because it's dystopian enough. Maybe you write them. Tell them that.
The writers of Black Mirror watch this show, and there's going to be an episode. It's like, okay, I want you to imagine, what was the video game? Deus Ex. I want you to imagine Deus Ex, but then they raid the guy, and they take out all of his cybernetic implants, so he's just a torso sitting on the bed. It's like, just trying to get my stuff back, guys. That's not Orwellian at all. That's like Orwellian to the nth degree.
Or your arm is, you know, $25,000 arm, and you can't really just get another one. Like, oh, we found child pornography in your thumb.
Stored in the firmware of your thumb.
So now we have to keep this arm in evidence for the next 2 years while the case rolls out.
That's like Lore from Star Trek. Under his thumbnail, he had the board control circuitry or whatever, and it's like he would flip up his thumbnail and like dial it back and mess with data. It's literally that now. Is what we've come full circle. And other sad news. The DHS is the newest extension of the corporate copyright enforcement arm of Apple. So the DHS has seized iPhone screens, and there's so many stories about this. So Jessa Jones is an iPhone repair lady. Like, did you watch her congressional testimony? She's like, I'm a stay-at-home mom, but I learned how to fix iPhones because it's not that hard. And it's like, we'll get to the Apple confiscating stuff that she's imported from China bearing the Apple logo in a second. Apple's got, they call it the Genius Bar, and a stay-at-home mom is fixing your stuff like iPad minis, where when you take an iPad mini into the Apple store, they're like, oh no, we don't fix those. Those are unfixable.
Yeah, but they did mention in this article, this is sort of tangentially related. They discounted her testimony because they said she's not an engineer. She's a molecular geneticist. So she might be a step above the Genius Bar in terms of intelligence. Your argument might not be that great when you're talking about this woman.
Well, it's Apple's, multi-billion-dollar company. It's like, oh, we can't fix those. We can't let people fix those. That's just not allowed. And so the problem, what's happening here, according to Louis Rossmann, and Louis Rossmann's got a video to go with that as well, which you should totally check out because he sort of goes into it, is the Apple screens are sort of a fused together device. There's ribbon cables, there's some electronics, there's the actual LCD, and there's the touch glass. And 95% of the time when somebody breaks the screen on their phone, it's just the touch glass. And so people in China will get those for recycling, or they'll pull them for parts or whatever. They'll replace the touch glass, but not the ribbon cable and not the LCD screen and not any of the other stuff. And then people in America will buy those as refurbished parts and get them back. And so Apple is saying, no, those are counterfeit parts because they still bear the Apple logo, which is disingenuous in my opinion.
And the only part that bears the logo in a lot of these cases is the ribbon cable. That's the one thing that you can't get anywhere else. You get that with the Apple logo. That's the only way to get it. And they admitted that the stuff she ordered was a combination. It was sort of like she was taking whatever she could find. Just Frankenstein. Some of them were legitimate Apple displays. Some of them were not legitimate. But that story goes in to point out that under existing law, none of this matters because this, I can't remember the word that they use, but this is sort of protected. It's like, well, yeah, if you have a part that's sort of cobbled together from real parts and not real parts, whatever, it doesn't matter. You're allowed to do that. And so they cited it was that motherboard, several laws. It was like, if she just pursues this at all, she should win. But of course it's against Apple. And that's an army of lawyers.
Now, she paid $1,700 for the shipment of phones. Apparently, customs valued it at $276 and sent her this kind of smarmy letter that's like, yeah, we possess this. The people from DHS, I can't believe that they would honestly, they were asked for comment by my motherboard and others, and their general response was, hey, we do the same thing when people import counterfeit Nikes. And it's like, if the people at DHS honestly don't see a difference between these cobbled together parts and imported fake Nikes, then God help us all.
Yeah, well, you underestimated Jessa Jones. I think you're overestimating DHS and the kind of person who works at DHS.
You're saying they're probably not molecular biologists?
Probably not.
So this is going to be a story that we follow with great interest. I think maybe in the long run, unless things are just so unbelievably corrupt all the way up and down the chain, I think in the long run, this will probably be good for repair advocates because this case is so absurd. Apple should have probably gone after the people that are importing like the actual fake low quality screens as opposed to like the refurbished screens or the refurbished, whatever. Because, people in China, you can totally order, fake parts. In this case, I don't think that was the case based on what Louis Rossmann was saying, but it is totally the case that you could get counterfeit parts that are completely counterfeit parts, I think. But even then, I think it's going to be up to the repair specialist to take on the responsibility of saying, oh, this part is substandard, it's not going to work in the screen. Or, Apple could make all of this go away by providing replacement parts at a reasonable price.
Oh, that was one of the laws. Well, the law is, as long as nobody's trying to pretend that these are real parts, then you can't say that they're counterfeit. And the people she was buying from did not pretend that they were real parts. In fact, they admitted it was a mixture of, some of them were refurbished, some of them were real, some of them were just knockoffs that they made there. But they weren't being sold as Apple official parts. And the only reason
compatible. The
only reason DHS seized them is because they got the Apple logo on the little flex cable.
And that logo is smaller than the head of a pen, or it's so small that a penny looks gargantuan.
But I bet Apple has put together some training documents and sent them over to DHS, and it was like, look for the logo, like that type of thing. I bet that's what went down there.
You think maybe people that buy Apple phones are going to open up their phones and look for the Apple logo on every single component to be like, oh man, this is a counterfeit Apple?
If they do, then the repairs are going to get a lot. Can you imagine the normies trying to take apart an iPhone? They're going to destroy it.
Maybe that's Apple's business model all along. It's like, I've got to take it apart and make sure the innards bear the official Apple logo. Lawmakers have moved to block the government from ordering digital backdoors. So, the headline sounds really good, and then you read the article, and it's like, nobody ever supports this.
Yeah, they tried this in 2015. It never even made it past the initial phase. There's no indication that this is going to do any better. But yeah, they're saying, hey, all this talk of the FBI and stuff, they want backdoors and everything. This is a law that would prevent them. It's kind of like the FCC. Not only are we going to stop you from doing this now, but there's going to be a law in the books saying you can never do it, which has no chance.
Yeah. Now, the article's very careful to point out that things like wiretap laws still exist. Like the phone company has to provide wiretap access to law enforcement for law enforcement purposes. But this could conceivably prevent orders, a judge from issuing an order to Apple at the behest of the FBI, for example, to build in a backdoor or to assist them in constructing a backdoor to gain access to iPhones, which is a subtle but important distinction.
And more importantly, things like routers and switches and stuff. Phones, okay, we can talk about wiretaps, but wiretap law doesn't affect, at least I don't think it affects, data. It's the hardware just for moving data.
Little do you know about the secret FISA court interpretation of that law.
But hey, it would be nice if you're one of those people who calls up your representative. There's something to talk to him about.
And also in other, I don't know how would you describe news that causes you to go ree?
Well, it's definitely going to make a lot of people go ree. And we're going to go ahead and you're going to question our sources here. There are no, I checked for other sources. They don't exist. And I don't think it necessarily means it's fake news. But these are from very right-wing sources. And we get blamed for being both right and left. The truth is neither. But yeah, we know these are sort of untrustworthy sources. In the case of the second story, there's a link to the actual thing. So it's not, they're not making it up. This first story, though, is, nobody else reported it, but I don't have a hard time believing it.
Neither left nor right. We aim to be relentlessly reasonable, always erring on the side of logic and reason.
And this is a story about fact.
Yes.
Can facts be evil? Well, of course they can, but does that mean that we shouldn't listen? If it's the truth, but it's bad, should we shield ourselves from it?
Twitter is banning conservatives for posting facts. So this is in the UK, and it was something to do with Muslims.
He reported statistics dealing with they have gangs in the UK which recruit young people, and he reported a statistic. I don't know whose statistic it was, that Muslim gangs recruited way more than anybody else. It was overwhelmingly.
So Twitter banned his account.
He posted some statistics, and it's what they've come to call hate facts. So, we talk about crime statistics in America. Minorities commit more crimes. Now, there's a lot of people will tell you that's got to do with the economics or, police being having discrimination and stuff like that. But it is a fact that minorities commit more crimes. But that's the kind of thing that Twitter would now call a hate fact, because it's race, religion, that kind of thing, cultural. It's a fact, but it still promotes hate, so you can't have it.
Do you think maybe that's because people don't understand that correlation is not necessarily causation? It's like, oh, obviously the minorities are the problem because statistically the crimes are higher. That would be an example of that type of fallacy.
I think a lot of these Twitter users are selling that. So that's definitely part of the problem. But it doesn't make it untrue. And if you can't simply state a fact because of censorship, then that's kind of a dangerous thing.
But it probably is okay to, if someone is stating a fact and then trying to use that to incite something else, then that's probably still a bannable offense. But that doesn't. Go ahead.
Who decides?
Well, I mean, it doesn't look like that even happened here. It was just sort of a blanket, let's do a zero tolerance policy. But a zero tolerance policy, nothing in real life is ever that black and white. There's always shades of gray.
Well, according to the EU laws, or UK laws or whatever, that's not the case. You simply can't do these things. If it's a fact and it offends people of certain protected classes, it's not okay.
I would say that the UK is sort of doubling down on that because they're saying that their prison time for offensive online posts is totally the direction that we should go in, which is really disturbing.
Yeah. So these are new guidelines, and this story actually does link to the guidelines. So this is not really as much of an opinion piece. And again, Daily Caller. We know it's like a Trump cheerleader website. But yeah, they're saying that if you make these statements online, it's going to be a crime. It was a crazy amount of time that you might have to do.
It's like 7 years at the far end.
Yeah, ridiculous. And it has to do again with race, religion, and gender. So if those things if you're stating bad facts about race, religion, or gender, even if they're true, 7 years in prison.
That just seems insane. I don't know. Is that really necessary? Like is stuff happening in the UK that is so bad that is necessary to actually reel that in? Or is this just things are so amazing in the UK, this is all that you guys have to worry about?
I don't think the things are all that amazing. You know what? I think it might. Here's a conspiracy for you. The private prison companies have sucked all they can out of America. So they're moving over to the EU, and they're starting all these. Have you seen the knife laws? The crazy knife laws?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So they're starting up the knife laws, and they're starting up all this, GDPR type stuff. They're just going to fill those prisons.
I don't know. Somebody has been retweeting me the news about that, and I honestly don't know if it's a real Twitter account or not. But the more I look into it, the more that I don't think that it is a fake Twitter account. I think it's real. Somebody keeps retweeting me like the London Metropole Police success stories or whatever, and it's like somebody had a picture of a multi-tool that had a hammer on the end, and it just looked like a completely ordinary multi-tool, and it's like, this weapon has been taken off the streets, and the police were really proud of that, and it's like, dude, that's like a 4-inch hammer. I mean,
I saw one for a potato pillar.
That can't be real, right?
I'd like to believe it's not, but who can say? I mean, that's the thing about it. It's gotten to the point where you can't tell. Parody and reality have merged into one, so you can't really. 5 years ago, you showed me that story, I'm going to be like, oh, that's funny. But now it's as chilling as it is funny.
It is kind of terrifying, but at least we've got the technology to figure it out for now until they figure out a way to shut that down. Moving right along. So California has adopted a requirement that new homes will have solar systems. So yeah, there's a
solar systems. That's good.
Solar panels.
How many planets?
I didn't even think about that. Solar panel installation systems, not like a bigger on the inside kind of a thing.
Yeah, and it sounds good, right? I mean, solar panels, they're good for the environment. They're good for keeping you. If something happens to the grid, then you're on your own. But so there's a guy, H.L. Mencken. He's like a big, libertarian guy. He's got some great writing if you ever want to check him out. But he has this amazing quote. I'll paraphrase a little bit. I don't remember exactly what it was. But if you have a really good idea, but you need the government to enforce it, you didn't have a good idea.
So what you're saying is forcing people to use solar systems is probably not a good idea?
It seems a little heavy-handed.
I like that solar technology is pretty much in its infancy, and solar panel technology is just to the point where it's getting exciting. Battery technology, where we are now, does not excite me at all. Battery technology makes it seem like we're stuck in the late 1600s.
I saw a great conspiracy theory. Did you see Musk's tweet about like he was going to destroy the short sellers with a major new announcement? Somebody thought that the major new announcement might be that Tesla is going to be partnering with California to install all of these new solar panels, and that's going to crush the shorts. Because they got the batteries. Yeah,
that might be interesting. Hey, Tesla's done a world of good in Puerto Rico, because apparently we've forgotten that Puerto Rico is U.S. territory and they still don't have power and there's brownouts, and it's real bad news in Puerto Rico. But apparently Tesla's done some stuff there and it's been really good.
I think they got a good result from that Australia thing too.
Oh yeah, the Australia thing's working. God, you don't ever see the good stuff in the news like that.
No, actually, I did see a story. I didn't include it because it's not that interesting. But they did some kind of audit, and the Australian thing, it saved them a ton of money.
Wow.
That thing. Yeah.
Nicely done. So Tesla is going to, by law, save a whole bunch of people in California money?
We don't know that, but that would certainly help them.
Uh-oh, there's been an important Fourth Circuit ruling on cell phone border searches. So this was definitely the most time-consuming story this week, because this story didn't tell me a damn thing.
Yeah. Well, it kind of told us that I think the big takeaway here is when it comes to searching your phone and other computers at the border, it's still kind of up in the air, and eventually we're going to get a Supreme Court decision about that.
So in that context, I think that the ruling that just happened was designed specifically to avoid getting any kind of Supreme Court ruling for the next 50 years. Because it seems like to me the ruling is not really super specific. It could be interpreted in some good ways, which maybe is good, but it also doesn't really close the door that I think that the way that it should. So if it sounds like we're speaking in tongues at this point, maybe we should probably recap where we are in America in terms of so in America we've got the Constitution, which is like the most important thing ever, and well, theoretically. And one of the things in the Constitution is that citizens, should be secure in their persons and papers and not subject to unreasonable searches and seizures. But there's this border exception that's just been getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Would you say that it's mainly because of fear of terrorism the last 20 years?
I think that's how it's sold to us. And it's a crazy percentage of the landmass that's under that.
Yeah, it's like 100 miles inland, which is like 2/3 of America.
Yeah, it's the majority of the country is within this non-Fourth Amendment zone.
Which doesn't make any sense.
So there have been a lot of arguments about, we've talked about, if you come into this country from a foreign country and you're a little suspicious, maybe you're wearing a turban, then they will now ask you for your social media passwords. Like, that's a real thing. They'll be like, hey, give up your passwords so we can go in and make sure you're not ISIS or whatever.
To the relentlessly reasonable, that does not seem reasonable.
And they can search your phone and your computer and things like that. So
again, totally unreasonable.
These rulings have to do with that, and it's kind of good news, I think. Maybe if you had to vote yes or no, maybe you'd vote yes for this being good. One of the things was they talk about the nexus of evidence, which is you need to be investigating something other than the fact that they're just at the border with their phone. Like, you have to have a reason to suspect something from these people. It didn't come right out and say it.
Yeah.
But it sort of laid down case law. If you want to argue it the next time, and like you say, it could be like 12 more cases before we get to the Supreme Court, then you could cite this and be like, no, you didn't have any reason to search me.
It sounds like that it's I think what you're talking about, I read on some law blogs, is like a case-by-case nexus. Like, the evidence could be thrown out if there was not a legit reason to do that. So a lot of the language in here makes it seem like, well, you can still do the search, but if it's not like super terrorism smoking gun, then the evidence for that is going to be thrown out later, which doesn't really put the genie back in the bottle, doesn't really close the door, in my opinion.
Yeah. It's something we need a definite answer on. But I fear if it goes to the Supreme Court, we're going to get an answer we don't like.
Do you think that the fear here is that the people that were writing the ruling are scared enough that, if it was written in plain black and white, that the American people might be like, no, hell no, we're not going to go for this. This is crazy.
Well, they could be fearful in both directions, because it could go that way,
or the shadow government could,
or there could be another 9/11, and then it's like it was because of this judge and weakening the policy, and then they go way in the other direction.
There goes that guy's political career,
and it'll be the entire landmass that gets the Fourth Amendment stripped away from it.
There are reasonable people in the world. I don't know why they can't get any traction in government, but I do know why. But.
I think this next generation coming is going to blow your mind when it comes to being reasonable.
Switching gears a little bit, the EMP Commission has warned that a blackout of electricity, food, and water to last a year or longer and be a huge death toll. So this article is basically just saying if there's an EMP event or something that messes with the power grid or really anything, that because everything, like all business has been optimized for just-in-time deliveries, nobody stocks anything anymore. And so if anything at all disrupts this sort of ecosystem of deliveries, that it's going to cause everything to come crashing down, and it would take at least a year to get back on track.
Yeah, and it was actually an EMP Commission that was formed. I can't remember when it was, and they've sort of been tasked with, like, we'll figure out how bad it would be. And the results they come up with were pretty much what you'd expect. It would be Mad Max pretty rapidly. Because I think we have, what's like 7 meals before you start killing is the estimation. And not from these guys. That's just, that's a well-known prepper thing. It's like you're 7 meals away from murdering to get what you need. And they talk about how we're not equipped. We all have electric appliances, and once that's over, you have to boil water, you have to cook food, you're going to have to start cannibalizing your own home and furniture. When that runs out, then you have to leave your house. They talked about a curfew, but who's going to enforce it?
There's not going to be enough people.
Yeah, what police department is going to
obviously we need more police here in America.
But see, I don't think the police, like when it comes down to that, why would you have a family to protect. You're not going to go out and be a cop. There's no way.
And so this actually happened once in 1859. There was a solar flare. And the solar flare destroyed like the telegraph system and all this kind of stuff. But it wasn't as big of a deal in 1859. If what happened in 1859 happened today, it would be much worse than this article is describing.
Well, that's one of the big things they talk about is the people of 1859 were way better equipped to deal with frontier life and that kind of thing. People knew how to live off the land to some extent. At least most of them did. And nowadays, forget it.
We had that story, what was it, a couple of weeks ago, where a 30-minute power outage caused a 2.9% reduction in flash production on a global scale.
Yeah. And there were also 60 million people in the U.S. in 1859. 200 million now. Or is it 250 now?
It's like almost 300.
Is it almost 300?
So 350 maybe? I don't know.
That's a lot more people competing for the same resources.
It's going to end really badly. Really extra
So
badly.
the lesson here is if that happens, just go straight to cannibalism. Don't use up your dry foods. Save those for later and just start eating your neighbors.
I would also point out localized disasters like Louisiana and Puerto Rico. Louisiana, Katrina was a long time ago at this point, and it's still not exactly right. And Puerto Rico, man, those Puerto Ricans, I actually feel really bad for Puerto Rico because they've just been abandoned and forgotten.
How about Hawaii?
Oh, yeah, the volcanoes.
So people built houses on a volcano.
Well, I feel like they probably should have known better in that case. Maybe. Oh, there come the downvotes.
It is maybe a little too soon.
Ticketmaster hopes to speed up event access by scanning your face. So that's going to be more than 8% accurate, like we were learning from the police database, right? Because that was only 8% accurate in the police database.
Well, the police database, the problem was the initial images that they have of those people were terrible, but they used them anyway. Here, I imagine they will have a very, very amazing, like 200-point scan of your face. But the problem is, what happens when their database gets hacked and they've got an amazing 200-point scan of your face?
That will totally be, that's going to be amazing. It's like 3D printable latex faces that map your face onto somebody else's face, and then you just go commit crimes with impunity.
Yeah, or use their credit card. Go to the store, go to the Amazon store, use their stolen Amazon login, slap on their face, no questions asked, just in and out, take whatever you want.
You get the free yogurt, all the free yogurt you can stand.
I think people will go for this, though, because they talk about the way this technology works. You don't have to, like, walk up and stand in front of the box office and let it, like, a laser go up and down your face like the old sci-fi movies. This just catches you out in the crowd. So they can literally have cameras running while all the masses are coming in and spot anybody who's not supposed to be there.
That's not dystopian at all. How many times can you say that in an episode of the Level 1 News? Jeez.
Well, how many stories do we have?
If you're in Europe, or even if you're not in Europe, GDPR is coming to life. GDPR is the General Data Protection Requirement. Companies, like, you have a right to be forgotten as a European citizen. You can ask companies to delete all of your data, and companies are not really supposed to collect much data in the first place without affirmative consent. So some companies are finding it hard to set up their infrastructure to be able to comply with that. So services like this one are popping up, which will just block you from accessing the resources if your IP address hails from Europe.
And if you...
Or the EU, I should say.
If you use some kind of VPN or something to get around this, I think they've got a pretty ironclad argument in court. It's like, hey, this person knew exactly what they were doing. They did everything they could to get around we tried to keep them safe. They got around it. They came in where they weren't welcome. We're allowed to keep their data. I bet they would win that case.
Suddenly, I'm starting to think the people that came up with GDPR are the people that are really, really after the, the balkanization of the internet, meaning that we segment the internet into the nation states that underpin it, which is not one of the ideals of the internet.
That's real bad news for the EU because most of the culture gets created here.
They're coming down, folks. No, engagement. We need to offset that with more engagement posts. So I watched this video. Uber shows off its flying car prototype, which looks like a giant drone. I watched their video with like all their people and like the guy from NASA, and he's like, yeah, I used to work at NASA. We're going to make this thing happen. And like their little prototypes, and it was a lot of CG. And I really think this is ripe for turning into a parody, because I don't think that any of those people are in any way connected to reality.
The thing that really got me about this story is they expected these big helipads to land a flying taxi, every 24 seconds. Can you imagine? You would have to have air traffic control just for that. And what happens when there's two competing companies?
What happens when you've got a little old lady that's trying to get out of the air taxi?
You just throw her out.
Ejector seats from old ladies.
So very optimistic, ambitious maybe is the word to use. It sounds kind of cool. It seems like most of these will be on rooftops too, so maybe not as convenient as you think. You're still going to have to ride an elevator, and I guess that's quicker than on the ground.
It depends on the building. I mean, a lot of the buildings have express elevators to the upper floors or to the roof, perhaps. So, if you choose the right building, you may just be extending the elevator shaft, another story, and then you've got the express elevator to the ground floor. It just depends on how much Uber's willing to pay for that.
We'll see. Maybe it'll sort of take the congestion out of the regular streets, and we just sort of, the skies get congested, the streets get less congested, and we just end up with kind of a 50-50 thing.
So what you're saying is the people that live above will never have to touch the urchins that live below.
Oh, there's lots of sci-fi about that. Like wasn't there a Final Fantasy that was about that? Like the below people and the above people?
Yeah, and that was, when New York was like redoing their subway, I think it was like in the 80s or 90s. Man, you got to go back and watch some of those ads, because New York was like, even the most ghetto fabulous, thug gangster and the Wall Street business tycoon, everybody takes the subway. So let's keep the subway amazing and clean and not filled with the graffiti and stuff like that. And now it's like, no, we've given up on the subway. We're not digging any new tunnels. You're just going to have to rely on Uber's Sky Car, because, only the murderous use the subway. EA is going to push forward with loot boxes in a headline that surprised no one.
There were a couple of countries that actually ruled against it and said that was gambling. And they're kind of just saying, you know what, we're going to do this anyway. And I wonder at what point does one little country versus all that loot box money result in the GDPR type thing? It's like, okay, well, you people don't get to play these games. It's that simple.
I'd say that'll happen probably sooner rather than later. Can you imagine if they didn't play ball with that, though? If they're like, okay, we'll give you a version of the game that doesn't have loot boxes, and then like the Lithuanian version of whatever from EA is like the most amazing version of something ever because you get the whole story.
But then, well, they're talking about like the FIFA game here. That's the big one. So then, and listen, FIFA's not a big seller in America, I bet. But then, are they going to be allowed in online play? Because they either have everything, or they're nerfed because they can't get the powered up players. So it's unfair by default for them.
So they'll only be playing in Lithuanian servers where everybody's got a nerfed account?
I don't know. A lot of questions there.
Sorry, Lithuania. I actually like you guys. You should give us an upvote to offset those earlier downvotes because engagement. Things are looking bleak as ZTE ceases its main business operations. ZTE is a Chinese cell phone company. This article from TechCrunch is sort of, things are kind of weird though, because like this phone company's caught up in this geopolitical mess.
Yeah, we reported last week that ZTE and Huawei cannot be sold in the U.S. or on U.S. military bases. I think that's where they're probably the most popular is the deployed soldiers, because I don't know anybody that's got a ZTE phone. Do you?
No.
But I imagine you can get them here.
Huawei was making some really interesting looking electronics though, not just phones, laptops, and some other stuff too. So I was really looking forward to Computex to get a closer look at some of the Huawei stuff, because Huawei, I mean, they've come out of nowhere. I mean, they're not really coming out of nowhere because the Chinese company that underpins them has been around forever. But in terms of like, we're going to be a first party thing for products outside of China, it's exciting, but not so much now.
The bigger thing here is that part of these sanctions would stop them from getting their hands on certain networking equipment they need to build their devices, stuff that they don't build themselves. So it wasn't so much you're not allowed to sell them, but this was going to cripple their supply chain.
So what you're saying is that, well, it seems to me that one solution for this would be to modularize phones even more than they are. I mean, theoretically, the SIM card should be the cryptographic powerhouse of a phone, and if the Chinese companies are not involved in making the cryptographic controls, there's not really a lot they can do to leak information if all of the cryptography is controlled by the SIM. Now, there are side channel attacks and there are lots of practical problems with building it that way, but if we were legitimate, I mean, it just seems so dumb, because building any type of this stuff is definitely a global operation. It's going to involve U.S. companies and Chinese companies and probably Japanese companies and companies in Germany and the European Union. And if we all don't trust each other, that's actually completely okay. We can build that lack of trust into the technology and the way that the data is serviced, and the consumer would benefit from that. But I think that because everybody's concerned with building their own backdoors and weaknesses into that, we end up with this mess that we have now. Yeah,
but do you think there's any possibility that the major U.S. companies aren't in bed with the government to some extent?
I mean, so we should just assume that everybody is out to do this kind of stuff to the hardware, and then we'll have better hardware for it.
But you can't admit that if you're the government or those companies.
But everybody's doing it. Everybody knows that.
But the normies don't know that. The normies think that the Russians are just, it's like it's the Russians and the Chinese and they're evil. We would never do that. But the reality is,
we're all doing that.
You talk about the solution could be that. Well, it turns out the solution is actually just more political posturing.
So President Trump has just saved the embattled Chinese filmmaker ZTE. Woo! So we go from lows to highs just that fast, but not so fast. I think this headline's a little misleading.
Yeah, I think this Trump probably, I don't know if he knows enough about technology to know what was going to happen here, but he immediately saw the opportunity here. It's like, yes, let's negotiate, because that's what he's good at. Say what you want about Trump. He's not great in a lot of ways, but he's a hell of a negotiator. And I think he's going to get in there and, try to get some advantages for the U.S. And China has a huge interest in saving these guys because that's a lot of their economy.
It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out over the next few weeks. It's going to be interesting to see their presence at Computex, in all honesty. It's like, did they go from the giant mega booth that takes up an entire city block inside the exhibition hall, or is it just like an out-of-the-way place in one of these sub-exhibition halls? Time will tell. I'm sure it'll be in the Level 1 Computex coverage. We've got so much Tesla news this week. Tesla, the engineering head, Doug Field, takes a break from the company. He's on paid leave. It sounds like he's on vacation.
You
Is
wonder.
this really news? I mean,
Reuters thinks so. I think we got a lot of leave Tesla alone people in the audience. They hate it when we talk about Tesla, and they're right in the sense that I think they get a lot of negative press coverage, but they get a lot of positive press coverage too. They sort of live by it and die by it. So you can't be such a media darling without having everything scrutinized. And if the head of your division is like, I got to be away from this during a time what they call production hell, that's newsworthy.
So he is the guy that is in charge of the Model 3 production, is what I gathered from the article. And so the implication here is, what's he doing taking a vacation when it's like maybe they're waiting on a supplier?
Musk is sleeping at the office.
Yeah.
And this guy's in,
he's got to go on vacation.
He's in St. Bart's drinking from a coconut.
If you're that guy and you read this article and it's like, I don't think you guys understand. I put in 3 years, the past 3 years, everything is good to go. They don't need me anymore. They just need to follow the process. Everything is fine. We're just waiting on our suppliers.
Well, maybe he's the guy who decided to put all the robots in there. Maybe he's in a re-education camp, a Tesla re-education camp.
Well, of course, it made the news because there were 2 teens killed and 1 seriously injured in a Fort Lauderdale Tesla crash. It does look like Autopilot was enabled in this crash.
No, I don't think so, because they were doing way too fast.
Oh, okay.
So they hit a wall. They were doing like 60 and a 35 or something like that. So I don't think the Autopilot would ever do that. So this one, this seems pretty cut and dry. They were joyriding, having a good time. These were younger kids, I think like college age kids, maybe high school. They hit a wall, but the problem is, as soon as they hit that wall, the whole car just burst into flames
immediately.
And the kid that survived was thrown from the vehicle, and the fire was so bad it immediately killed the other 2. So and this article does point out that gasoline engine cars do also catch fire. But again, these are supposed to be, this new technology is supposed to protect us, supposed to be this amazing new thing, and these crashes are pretty bad.
Hang on, I'll read the disclaimer from the article. That's at the very bottom, I think. I'm trying to scroll down, but that news JavaScript. The GDPR has definitely not helped the news JavaScript. It just causes all kinds of problems.
It might be on the other story. It is on the other story. Well, so this leads into a really amazing part of the story is that they towed the car and, it was just in a salvage yard somewhere. And I think 7 days later or 6 days later, it burst back into flame.
Yeah, the fire was out, but the battery caught fire again. So in Tesla's guides, they talk a little bit about how Tesla makes some of the stuff online to check out for like first responders. And I checked some of that out. And it is actually really interesting because they're like, use copious amounts of water, like get a second supply of water and just douse that thing with a crazy amount of water. And then it talks about how to disable and remove the batteries and how Tesla will fly engineers out to remove the batteries and blah, blah, blah. And in some other crashes that have been near Tesla plants, they've helped, first responders dismantle the vehicle to make it safe again and all sorts of interesting stuff. And so a lot of first responders don't know how to respond to electric vehicles the way that they know how to respond to gasoline vehicles, which is part of it. And that's not Tesla's fault. But it is interesting that the, inert wreckage bursts into flames again, which I'm sure that's probably happened with a gasoline vehicle. Like somebody didn't drain the gas out of the engine of the tank properly, and then something happened and it caught fire. I
think they always evacuate them. And the question, I guess, here is if you had gone through the proper battery disconnect with this level of damage, would that battery have simply ignited itself anyway? I'm not sure. Of course, the NTSB is looking into this, so I'm sure we'll have a report at some point, see exactly what happened.
And for the guys that love to email me, as usual, it's important to remind everybody that even though electric vehicle fires are heavily represented in the media, electric vehicles do not catch on fire more often than gasoline cars. According to the National Fire Protection Association, more than 150,000 gasoline fires occur every year in the U.S.
Yeah, I'd like to see a percentage, though, because just to say that 150,000 out of... Aren't there more cars than people in America?
Yeah.
So that's a big number. And how many electric cars do we have?
Yeah, we need to... I don't know if we've got enough electric cars on the road for it to really be statistically significant yet, because... Yeah, I don't know.
But that's not, you think, well, okay, They gave me the disclaimer, so I can calm down now. But
I want my updates.
the Tesluts who keep advocating for Tesla. There was another crash, unfortunately. Now, we don't know if the autopilot was on, but a guy hit a fire truck.
Yeah.
Which, that's hard not to notice, a fire truck.
This is the one I was thinking of. I can't wait for the dash cam footage on this one.
Yeah, he hit it at 60 miles an hour.
Jesus, dude. Time to reevaluate your life decisions. Just, how did you miss that?
This is the second Tesla that hit a fire truck. The other one, it turned out, was trying to avoid a head-on collision. So that kind of makes sense. And it was the autopilot that did that. We don't know if the autopilot was... This car had autopilot, but we don't know if it was engaged.
Witnesses said that the Model S did not brake prior to impact.
Didn't kill him, though. So, nice crash rating, I suppose.
Symantec stock has tanked after they issued an apparently obtuse warning, but they didn't really supply any details about what it was, except that, no, we did not leak anybody's personal information.
Well, it was SEC investigation, which you have to tell your shareholders about. So I think they did the bare minimum. They're like, yeah, something's going on, but we don't have to tell you what, so we're not going to. And it's bad news for Symantec. Their stock went way down, 20% on that announcement. I think it clawed back a little bit. But I wonder, do you think a lot of people use Symantec product at this point? I don't.
I would like to think no. I mean, at one time they were a great product, but anymore,
no. It's been a lot of years since they were a great product.
I have a feeling this is going to be accounting irregularities, that they're counting things like the free installations that are bundled with OEMs as like paying customers and just crazy stuff like that.
Probably. And maybe just trying to keep it alive. A dying business trying to stay alive and borrowed a bunch of money that they can't pay back, maybe.
Bad news for creditors in China. You're not going to get your Symantec loans back. Isn't that how they usually do that?
Should have invested in ZTE.
That's how Remington did it. Remington did the whole bankruptcy thing, and they were like, oh, creditors in China? No, we're not paying you. Everybody else, you're good, though. It's like, eh. Speaking of people loaning people things and then not paying them back and then minimizing risk, Goldman Sachs and Apple are going to launch a joint credit card. So this is kind of a follow-up. This is kind of new information, but there is enough information in this article that I can say that basically we predicted it correctly when we first mentioned it.
Well, we talked about, they announced they were thinking about doing financing for iPhones and stuff like that. I'm sure this is going to be a part of that.
Yes.
It's going to be built into that. They haven't announced that yet, but they totally will. And the other thing is, the new thing is, this credit card is going to have some sort of tie-in with Apple Pay.
Yeah.
So they show a screenshot of sort of like a little digital credit card on your iPhone. I imagine that you won't have to have a physical card. Could exist just on your Apple products. Use it that way, but it will be like a traditional credit card.
Now, to recap what we predicted the first time this came up, suppose that you've got a product maker that can make a product for $200 but sell it for $800. And suppose that you've got a finance company, a bank, whatever, that is willing to finance somebody $200 or $300, but they're not really willing to risk the full $600 difference there in terms of like people not paying the money back. So you've got a bank that will loan you $400 on that $200 payment, that hoping that you'll pay the full thing back, but they're not willing to assume the full risk of if you don't pay them back. That looks like this is what's going to happen here. Apple and Goldman Sachs are going to share the risk of you absconding with your cell phone without paying for it on the credit card and then ruining your credit and all that kind of stuff. But Apple doesn't get the full retail value of the phone necessarily in that case, but Goldman Sachs is not on the hook for the full retail value of that phone either.
And they get the phone back. They're going to repossess it. And then you're out both a phone and a credit card, which is bad. So maybe you'll make that payment before you make other payments, because it's going to be such a disruption in your life.
Yeah.
Don't fall for this, for the love of God. I mean,
let's revisit the original problem. A $200 phone for $800? How are they doing that?
Yeah.
It's called robbery.
I mean, the first problem is you bought an iPhone. Your second problem is you did business with Goldman Sachs. And then you put the two together.
It's like Satan and Satan from a parallel universe. It's like two different Satans working against you. That's just It's like, well, we've already captured all the souls that we can in this universe. We're going to have to capture souls from an adjacent parallel universe because there's just not any more souls than that.
Yeah, and that definitely seems to be. You see all these posts online where it's like, oh, we millennials, we don't have any money, but they all got iPhones. And
Goldman Sachs is going to have what little money you have. It's going to widen the gap. Don't fall for it. And we'll see you on Wednesday.